So today we're talking about 541, Oscar 541. This is the last in the 5 group, which is still about interaction. And here we have the Oscar 41 really revolves around class community, the social community within your online course. It talks about establishing trust and rapport with students. And it gives some examples about that. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
Classroom community, and particularly that last piece of trust in a classroom, is really important online because we don't often see our students. We may have run into them at an event or a campus activity, but not in the classroom. So creating that relationship where students feel comfortable asking questions and where they are open to reaching out to either other students or to the faculty member can be a lot more of a challenge. There's not just a couple minutes at the end of class where they feel like, oh, I'm just going to go up there and ask a question real quick. So we really have to be intentional and foster that relationship building, making students feel welcome to ask us questions. And the types of activities that we can include in this, really those discussion boards, reaching out to students, and the feedback that we give on their assignments can open those doors and make students really feel welcome and open.
They don't sit next to a student, they don't see the student's face, they don't hear their voices necessarily. And because the same reason a faculty member might put their online class on the back burner, a student will do that too. If the student has kids at home and has a job that they're working on, they might forget about the course very easily. And so you want them to feel connected to the other classmates. You want them to feel a sense of obligation to the other classmates. I use discussion in my class. I set up really clear parameters where they have to log in 3 days a week. They have to have a particular number of responses to other students in the discussion forums. The icebreaker, right away, they need to feel like they're part of a community because they can feel very alienated in their at their computer, in their home, wherever their home is, away from all the other students. So super important to do that. So I have an icebreaker my first week. I also encourage them to use photos. So if they're not comfortable putting a face to their name, I say, then a picture of your cat or something that you feel kind of represents you, but that just gives them a little bit more sense of that embodiment for that student. And I think it works. I also split them into small groups too. And I think that creates that small community feeling as well.
Building a sense of class community is extremely important because the students need to feel comfortable working with each other, answering each other's questions, being helpful to one another. At first, I think students don't believe they can learn from other students, but if the activities are created in an appropriate way, they can learn from each other, and they realize that somewhere into the course, and they start interacting a little bit more, and then they start teaching each other. So they learn from each other, and then they realize, oh, I might know something that could help this other student. So I think putting the activities together in a way that gets them talking first right away, like in the icebreaker, is really important. I start out by talking about why people read literature. I teach literature and composition course. And then I ask them to introduce themselves, tell what their favorite kind of book is to read, what was the last book they read, and if they have a favorite author. And a lot of my students are parents, single parents or otherwise, and they like to talk about how they don't have time to really read. They used to read a lot more, but now Dr. Seuss is their favorite author, and they're used to reading children's books rather than anything else. But they say they're looking forward to reading in my class because they have to do it, and that they hope they'll enjoy it too. So I do that as an icebreaker, and they really start talking. But do you know about this author? If you like him, you'll like her. And they really do start sharing. And they talk about, well, you were in my psych class last semester. They make connections in other ways outside of the class and that first icebreaker?
I let them use VoiceThread. I don't,
So I'm going to stop the video there because it goes on to talk about specific and technologies, how they use that. But the general idea overall is that we need to provide a community feeling, social connection within the course, as well as establish trust and rapport with the students in order for them to continue to perform at high levels. So let's take a look at the actual wording for each part of this standard. And it says right out in front, building a sense of community mitigates the solitude and isolation reported by online learners. So we know when we look at the research and there's Bibo right there, online students become isolated and disconnected. And when they do that from a class, their persistence decreases significantly over the length of the course. So you may have a student who's, right there, high performing, and then all of a sudden by, midterm, they're sort of there, and then their performance really goes down after that. That could be due because of the feelings of isolation and solitude. Also, for when we're talking about activities and the social building, they really fall into these three different areas. One, the social activity focused on self-expression, right? You're giving autonomy to students, you're empowering their voices, you are welcoming diverse perspectives in the social setting. Cognitive activities that focus on academic and professional goals, and we talk about the DAPS strategy later on. And in the get starting, they familiarize themselves with learners and the course material and technology. So you're giving them a chance to talk to each other and familiarize themselves with what's going to happen in the course. All three of these, of course, are part of the community of inquiry model, which we talk about in EPTO. And they all foster this social presence within the course. It's that same feeling that you get when around week 7 or 8, when you walk into an on-campus class, there's a comfort there in the beginning of that class and the ending of that class, right? Everybody sort of knows each other. People are very comfortable. They're chit-chatting. They're saying hello or hi. They may be exchanging or texting each other, right? So that's that familiarity about what did you watch last night on TV, right? So there's that little exchange that we need to purposefully create online. It also goes on in the description of the standard to talk about affective expressions, open communication, and group cohesion. So these are the three things that you really need to bring about social presence in an online class. And we go back to the sense of belonging, which we know is of utmost importance, that students feel like they belong in the course, that the course is for them, that they can complete the course, and they don't feel like an outsider. They feel comfortable participating in discussion boards or through group work. They feel comfortable contacting you, emailing you, even showing up to some of your office hours. And then we talk about group cohesion, where they need to feel comfortable to be able to disagree and challenge each other and respect views. So a lot of your discussion boards, if you're ending up with, I agree, that's a great point, and nothing more, it may be because there's no group cohesion in the discussion, right? They haven't built those connections. So, you think more on the lines of how can you boost the social presence? Then we talk about regular and substantive interaction. So this is the actual law, right? So the Department of Education has added, in the last 2 years, has added these additional conditions for online courses in order to be considered an online course and not correspondence, right? So it's really a measure that's been put into place to make sure students are getting their money's worth, and it's a direct reaction to for-profit online colleges that have gone under in the last 5 or 6 years. So really, we go back to talking about how the online instructor sets the tone and gets the course off by opening up the space within the course where interactions and social affective feelings of belongings can occur, right? So you're building your community. There's a sense of growing to getting to know each other. You're establishing the expectations for the students that they're going to talk to each other. There's going to be a lot of work that they're going to do together. And it's aimed at building this trust between the instructor and students to students overall, that it is a space where they feel comfortable to fail, to try again, and to ask questions. And then finally, I know there's a lot of regulations with this one. Finally, it's talking about how you can build scheduled and predictable course facilitation and communication and engagement so that students begin to trust you, that there's going to be no surprises, that they have the flow of the course, they understand what's going to happen, there's nothing comes out of left field at them. And it also about how they're going to interact in engagements. They're going to learn a sense of trust and community. And also the faculty is going to be, the instructor is going to be part of the community, which is a big point where the discussions are not happening on their own, but the faculty or the instructor is participating in those discussions as a member of the community. And we'll talk more about that as well. So there's a lot of regulations with this one, but the good news is the practice is very simple, right? Where there's a lot about this same sort of effective practices that a lot of us already use in those classes. And so there in the community, we have 4 different things. And we've talked about some of these before, but we're going to talk about them in a social aspect tonight. So first is the community discussions. Right? How do you develop community discussions? We're going to talk about early and often feedback, which we also talked about as well in one of the earlier standards. And we're going to talk about it in the future as well. And we're going to talk about check-ins and office hours and how they're important for social presence and trust. And we're going to talk about integrated student feedback into your course design. So getting feedback on the course and how that helps build community within your online course. So let's talk about the first one. So community discussions, I don't have a lot of examples because a lot of you are doing these practices and are familiar with what I'm talking about. So first, of course, is the icebreaker. Just about every single course has a discussion where students introduce themselves and there is some sort of related questions or information. And we go back to what some of the regulations just said, where you're connecting them to their life, you're empowering their voices, you're allowing them to share their perspectives about the field, about their future, about who they are, right? So this icebreaker usually happens in the first week. There's a variety of different ways that you can run them. If you type in icebreaker online course on Google, you'll probably get 100 at least links of all these different types of ways to go about icebreaker. I've found a few that are very fun. One, I had students post a picture of a superhero or heroine that they thought they would be, right? Who would you be if you were a super person? And so there was enormous amounts of chatting going on and getting to know each other, especially when the students had very similar choices or the same one. So that was very good. We've also talked about the ask a question. Ask a question is not only for teaching maintenance in the course and getting students to communicate with you about questions they have, but also the ask a question. And I just see something in the chat here. Oh, excellent. So glad Marilyn's here. Ask a question also has a real social presence, right? And we've talked about onboarding technology too. If you're having not a lot of activity going, you ask a question, right? Think about onboarding that, right? So in the first week after they read the syllabus in the first chapter, have every single student post to the ask a question. Most often what happens is nobody wants to be first on that big white blank space. Nobody wants to show the rest of the students that they actually have a problem, a question. So everybody's emailing you. If you really enforce to ask a question, you can have quite a community build where some students who have been through Blackboard will rise sort of as leaders and start answering questions for students, where thing is, what the due date is. And there's a real sharing that goes in. And you can always pop in there and correct any miscommunications and redirect if you have to. The next one is digital cafe. Sometimes it's called the water cooler. Sometimes it's called the hallway. So you can have an open space where students are free to post whatever they like. And you can keep them on topic, right? So it's generally related to the course in general, but they may want to form a study group, right? So encourage them. You want to onboard this as well. So if you're going to have a digital cafe, you have them post something about the news one week, or if they found some sciencey news, right? They can also put that in there as well. Excellent. Thank you, Richard. One of the other things you can do for a community is have persistent discussions that last throughout the semester, especially one on glossary, where students, when they find a word or glossary word, they can put the word and a definition and maybe page references and even a picture and related information in as a post. Right. And you'll give them points on the information and the quality of what they're giving. You give them a little rubric. And this can really become part of their study process for an exam, right? Especially if your course has an enormous amount of new words, new context, right? This is a great one. Study guides and exam prep, same thing. You can use the discussion board to allow students to collaboratively build their study guides, and then you get to correct them, any kind of miscommunications that happen, and keep them, well within the correct information or processes. So that is a really great way for them to sort of build, especially if, it catches on with some people. The thing is, it also helps students who are falling behind. It helps them catch up, right? So they're not creating their glossaries on their own. They can take a look and then they can study directly from the discussion. They can use the study guides and help themselves. And of course, you can always grade participation levels. You can set a level of participation that's, in your expectations for them. The final one that I find really works well is a playlist. So you have an open discussion where you have students suggest songs for a playlist that people can listen to on Amazon or Google or iPhone, and that they can share. And you'll have students even start making playlists and sharing playlists. And it really builds community, those little things that build community, such as a playlist to listen to, right? So students who like the playlist will get involved, and students who, don't want any music while they study, they'll move on to the other discussions for community. Are there any questions about community discussions? So I have a few examples. I talk about for the ask a question, right? You can ask them something about the textbook, or you can have them confirm that they have access to the textbook by posting in the ask a question, right? Or you have them ask a question about the first chapter 1. So anything around that really helps to onboard that ask a question. The same thing with onboarding the icebreaker. You want to introduce yourself in the icebreaker, which gives them an example, a good example to follow, and you'll get really great responses. They'll follow your formula, how you've sort of placed it in there. Especially if you put a picture in, they'll put pictures in. If students are uncomfortable, they can always put a picture of a pet or a place, their favorite place, their favorite food. That does really long. And we're going to talk about the DAP-S strategy for this, which really works for icebreaker. Here's that playlist, and of course, the collaborative list for basically anything in the course. You can build discussions for collaborative list building, study guides, formulas, bonding, any kind of, collective information. You could really use that. We do have the wiki tool on Blackboard, but it is very old. It's very difficult for the students to use it. So the discussion would actually work as well. You can even do a post-first discussion so they don't see anything until they actually participate. And you can actually do a threaded discussion. So it's really, everybody's just posting like a text right to the same message. So it makes it easy for people to search. You can have them even tag their posts so that they could search on certain topics, right? So if they needed something about animal cell, you could have everybody tag, and then they could search on cell, and then all the posts on cell would appear. So the discussions are really an effective way to sort of manage collaborative knowledge, and it empowers the students. They put their own perspective in it. When Michael Wesch does this, he does collaborative list building in all his courses. He found that students go out to external sources and find and bring that in. So they end up with really rich exam study guides with a lot of different information, a lot of different perspectives. And the students sort of take it all in and find it really helpful to prepare them for the tests. So let's talk about DAPS. So DAPS is this really interesting technique that you can use in your icebreaker that works with short and long-term goals for students. And they found that for research, when students make short or long-term goals for the course, they perform better, especially when it revolves around actions within the course. So the way it works is in the icebreaker, you ask them what their short-term goal for the course is, and you give them some suggestions, like, I will do all the reading for the class. I will watch all of the videos for the class. I will get all my assignments in on time, right? So it's very sort of short-term focused on performance. I'm going to get at least a 75 or 80% on all my exams, right? So you're very focused. And then also their long-term goals. I want to complete this class so that I can move on to the nursing program. I want to complete this class with at least a B in order to be accepted into the radiology, right? Or dentist program, right? So you can set these sort of short-term, longer-term goals for themselves. And they have to be involved with these 5 things, right? There has to be a date involved. They can't make it open-ended, obviously. It really is effective when it's a date. It has to be achievable, right? So they may not be able to get 100% on all their exams, but maybe they can get 75%, right? It's much more achievable. It has to be personal to them, right? So they can't be given a goal. They have to create it from themselves. It's about intrinsic value and what they hold valuable for their own personal identity. It has to be positive. So it really helps them grow in the growth mindset, and it has to be specific. It can't be something like, I will make sure to be on time for class through the semester, right? So that's a little bit too ambiguous about that. You want to say something that's much more specific. I will be to class 5 minutes before every class starts, right? So you make it very specific. You've got it dated, you're using numbers. What they found was that when you ask students to reflect over time, so you have them set their goals in the icebreaker as part of their introduction. As you go on, every 4 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks, you ask them to reflect. So it really works well when you, after a big sort of summative assessment, so like a really big exam or their first paper goes in, they get their feedback, right, from your grading, and then you have them do a little reflection using the journal tool. So Blackboard has a great tool called Journal. It's a private conversation between you and the students. And it's a great way to have them reflect on their personal goals. And what they found over time is that if you embed this into the course, they start reflecting on their behavior, and they actually start to change their behavior as the course goes on. So the students, by midterm admit, I haven't really done what I said I was going to do. I've missed a bunch of classes. So now I'm going to recommit myself to get there on time. Right. And then, as the course goes on, they start to give themselves kudos, right? I'm really glad I made this goal. I'm really happy about this. I'm doing well in the course. And you can have a personal conversation back and forth with it. So the DAPS method is pretty effective when you sort of lay it out across the semester and you keep reminding them of their goals. It helps them persist. It builds their grit. And it helps them with growth mindset. So they're really expanding in growth mindset. Is there any questions about DAPS? Great. So let's talk about early and often feedback. So early and often feedback, we're talking about the practice where you're giving back feedback right away. So for research we see from the early alert system, from the studies they're doing from the the Community College Research Center, CCRC, we're seeing it across university research coming in. What it says is that if you provide students early feedback and often feedback, their persistence rate goes up. Right? You don't lose them in the middle of the semester. So the practice is that after 2 weeks, you start giving effective feedback, right? So that doesn't mean you don't give them any feedback in the first 2 weeks, but usually it's 2 or 3 weeks before the first real assessment. They start writing something or submitting something to you or take their first chapter exam, right? Around 2 or 3 weeks. And that's where you want to provide them early and often feedback. So you're in the first 2 weeks, you're talking in the discussion, you're watching their quizzes, you might be giving a little feedback, and then their sort of first assessment comes in, right? So you're starting to do that. So the first few weeks, you're in the course heavy. Your presence to them is heavy. You're emailing them, you're giving them feedback, you're putting little notes like in their quizzes they're taking, right? So you're giving them that information. Right. At week 5, you could start to taper off that early and often. So you could put a little space in there, right, as they increase their assessments. But you want to still continue that. So all your formative assessments that you're giving them, you want to give feedback. You want to give feedback on the homework when you can. You want to give feedback on the quizzes. You want to give feedback on anything you're having them do or prepare or their discussions, right? And most, you want to give them kudos, right? You want to say, this was an interesting perspective you took. I think this was a well-formatted discussion. Great job, right? So you're giving them kudos as they're working through the semester. And then in the very beginning of the course, you want to set those expectations, right? You tell them how often you're going to be talking with them and how often you're going to be providing them feedback. Only 6%, this semester is only 8% of students are checking their feedback regularly or at all. We can see the numbers on the Blackboard side. The students are not checking your feedback. I know you're giving them feedback. You're giving them tons of feedback and they're not checking. So make sure you onboard feedback. right? So make sure after your first assessment where they have feedback, you walk them through the process, you give them the Blackboard video, how to check their feedback. And you ask them something about it, right? In their journal, right? And you have them reflect, how was the feedback? Did you understand my feedback? Have any comments about your feedback, right? So you're integrating a reflective practice. So you're talking to them back and forth, and you're providing them this feedback over the semester. It's very effective. And also, I know from Caring Campus, we've talked about that before, another plug for Caring Campus next semester. Early and often feedback increases the feelings of belongingness. They feel like they belong because they're getting personalized feedback from the instructor. They feel like they're really participating, and really there's a lot of effort on both sides of the relationship, and that they're really learning. And so let's now talk about check-ins and office hours. Oops, there we go. So for check-ins, we run asynchronously for our online, but that does not mean that you cannot have check-ins with the students. And in fact, it's a great practice to have in the first week or two, is set out a whole different variety of days and times, and have each student do a Zoom with you. That way you onboard them to the Zoom process, so they know what happens, they talk to you, they get to know you, and you check in with them. How are you doing? You have the textbook, you're doing well in the course, right? You talk to them. This helps onboard office hours. And that really helps you going forward with student participation in these informal optional check-ins, right? So their office hours are optional. You really want them to be there, but they're technically they're optional. But these check-ins will help you manage that. So I do know a few faculty have had really great success here on CCRI with checking in once in the beginning of the semester, once at midterm, and then once before the final, right? To just sort of really clarify with them how they're doing in the course, what their current grade is, and how they should move forward, right? So it's, again, we're goal setting with them, we're goal setting. For office hours, I suggest not calling them office hours. Office hours is really not familiar to students. They do not understand the language for that, unless they're, of course, adult learners and they're in the workforce, right? So they know what an office is, and office hours, sort of open hours, is a great way to refer to office hours, right? Open hours, open house hours. I use boost sessions where I give you a boost. Come and learn, and I will give you a boost in your learning, right? Boost in your grade, right? So think about calling office hours. There's some new research coming out that says by changing office hours to something else, call it something more appealing, and then onboarding students to the office hour has a positive effect in performance, that students are more willing, they have more satisfaction with these office hours and check-ins. If that's not possible, and I totally understand some people are running 5 different sections and they have 250 people, totally understandable. Think about having a optional welcome session right in the first week or the beginning of the second week. Hold it, later in the day after people get out of work at 5 p.m. Invite students and sort of onboard them to office hours and Zoom in general. That really sets a good tone for community. Often you end up with these students coming back time and time for the full semester. And there's a lot of great work that can be done, using welcome sessions. And I also do a wrap-up session with the students as well. And you can always have this welcome session and then control who's in and out, right? Because you can, in Zoom, you can have a waiting room. So you can walk the students through, let one in at a time if you want to, and let others exit. So Zoom is a great tool for you to sort of control that. The other thing is you can actually schedule, formal sort of midterm checks with the students where you're sort of giving them a full report on their performance, their grade, and you're really sort of going over each assignment, what went well, what didn't, what you want them to work on, and that actually has a positive increase in engagements, as well as this feelings of belongings, right? They feel like they're sitting down at a coffee, a coffee shop, right? And everybody gets a coffee and a drink, and you sit down and you let the students in and out one by one and give and talk to them. Is there any questions so far? Oops. There we go. Lost my mouse there. And lastly, we're talking about integrating student feedback. Student feedback on the course design specifically, like how did the assignment go? What did you find challenging? What didn't go well for you? What would you recommend I change? Right? There's several things you can do. One of them I like is the exit ticket technique. So a lot of people have heard of the exit technique, which is at the end of every bi-weekly or after certain assignments, you have a little quiz that's anonymously that students take anonymously. You can use the survey tool in Blackboard to do this. Where you ask them some questions about specific assignments, right? How clear was the instructions? How well were you able to navigate the rubric, right? So you can really get a lot of feedback from the students about what's working and what's not in the course. And you can do it several times during the semester, and specifically look for those places where they're bottlenecking, right? So everybody in the class is doing okay, and then all of a sudden everybody gets one thing wrong, right? Ask them about it. Where did you go wrong here? Like, what was challenging for you? Would it be helpful if I put more instructions in or a video in, right? Get their feedback. And of course, you can ask them really specific questions about the project work or the group work or the discussion work. So you can get pretty detailed. Don't rely on the SRI to really give you really good information on the actual course design and how it's working in the course. And of course, the survey tool, again, really easy to use. It's the same as the test tool. So you can just build the questions as is. And the survey tool is totally anonymous. You can't figure out whose is what. It just shows a check that it's complete. So you know that they submitted something, right? So you don't know who did what, but you have 20 people, responded to your questions. So what I often do when I'm doing really looking for a course design feedback is in the beginning of the semester, I onboard the students. So I say, hi, I'm so glad you guys are here. I really need to hear from you about what you think about the course. So at certain times, I'm going to give you little surveys about specific information, and I value your perspectives. I value your feedback, and it's really going to help me make the course better and more clear, and that will only help you get a better grade, right? So students are more than happy to sort of participate in that type of feedback for you, and it builds community, right? They feel valued, they feel like they belong, and it really ups the social community within your course. We have a ton of resources this time. I'll be adding those to the website, quite a bit on building group work, community, social community, affective emotions within a class, how important they are to learning. And again, we know this because the hypothalamus has to be engaged as part of learning, and the only way to get the hypothalamus involved is through emotion. So you may see a lot of things coming out by other faculty about emotional teaching, emotive teaching, and there's some in here as well. And then, of course, there's still time to do a course review with me if you're interested. And this is the link for that. And there are going to be night points and some digital badges. If you do all 13 webinars plus the course review with me, you will earn a course reviewer status for the first 13 standards of OSCQR, which is great. And we are going to figure out in the future what the course reviewers will be able to do. And I think that has a lot to do with giving a lot of feedback on OSCQR in general and how this process is working and what we need to do in the future. So as well as be able to review people's courses when asked.